I found my name exactly where the caterers kept the mop bucket. Not in the ballroom. Not with my parents. Not with my cousins or the rest of my family. A single folding chair sat in the kitchen, beside a metal shelf stacked with paper towels, trash bags, and cleaning supplies. A white place card with EMILY Harper printed across it was taped to the seat. For a second, I honestly thought someone had made a mistake. Then I heard my younger sister laugh. "There you are," Natalie said as she stepped through the kitchen doorway in her white engagement dress. She glanced at the chair, then looked back at me with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Guess that's where you belong." The room went silent. One of the servers froze while carrying a tray of champagne glasses. My aunt, standing just outside the kitchen entrance, looked away as if she suddenly found the floor fascinating. I searched for my parents. My mother saw me. She saw the chair. She saw Natalie smiling. Then she simply adjusted the flowers on a nearby table and pretended nothing had happened. No one said a word. No one offered me another seat. No one even acted surprised. I looked down at the beautifully wrapped gift I'd carried into the party with both hands. Then I picked it up again. Without arguing. Without crying. Without giving Natalie the scene she was clearly hopping for. I turned around and walked straight toward the exit. Behind me I heard Natalie chuckle. "Oh, don't be dramatic." I never looked back. I had spent 6 weeks helping organize that engagement party. Every centerpiece had been assembled at my dining room table. When Natalie went over budget, I quietly covered deposits for the florist and photographer so she wouldn't have to cancel anything. I spent evenings answering vendor emails after teaching elementary school all day. I even arrived 3 hours early that afternoon to help decorate because 2 bridesmaids had cancelled at the last minute. Not a single guest knew any of that. To everyone else, I was simply the older sister slipping quietly out the front door before dinner. As I crossed the parking lot, I could still hear music drifting from inside the venue. Laughter followed me into the evening air. The gift box felt heavier than it should have. I placed it carefully on the passenger seat of my car before sitting behind the wheel. For several seconds, I didn't start the engine. Instead, I stared through the windshield, wondering why I had convinced myself this day would be different. Deep down, I already knew the answer. Because every time Natalie crossed a line growing up, my parents had the same response. "Just let it go, Emily. She's younger. Be the bigger person." Those words had followed me through birthdays, holidays, graduations, even Grandma's funeral. Tonight had simply been the newest chapter. I finally reached for my keys. Before I could turn them, a scream echoed from inside the building. It was Natalie. Loud enough that even people in the parking lot stopped walking. Then I heard her shout, "Where's the ring?" I kept both hands on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed once. Then again. And again. Natalie's name flashed across the screen first. I let it ring until it stopped. A second later, my mother's name appeared. I didn't answer that one either. Instead, I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to fix one of my family's problems. I was simply sitting in the silence they had spent decades teaching me to avoid. It was strange how quickly one folding chair beside a stack of cleaning supplies could force you to admit the truth. That chair hadn't been a joke. It had been a message that everyone else had understood long before I did. You help, you pay, you stay quiet, and you accept whatever place we're willing to give you. My phone vibrated again. This time it was my father. I declined the call. The screen barely went dark before another call came through. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat beside the unopened gift. As I stared through the windshield, memories came one after another. When Natalie wrecked her first car in college, my parents borrowed money to replace it. When my transmission failed 2 years later, Dad shrugged. "You've always been responsible, you'll figure something out." I did. I worked weekends tutoring students until I could afford the repairs. When Grandma was recovering after surgery, Natalie visited twice. I was there almost every evening after work. I grocery shopped for her, drove her to appointments, sorted her medications. Never because anyone asked me to, because someone had to. After Grandma passed away, everyone thanked Natalie for giving such a beautiful speech at the funeral. No one mentioned who had quietly cared for Grandma during those final 2 years. That was the pattern. Natalie received the applause. I handled everything that happened before it. A week before the engagement party, my best friend Rachel had invited me over for dinner. She had watched this cycle for years. "You don't have to go, Emily," she'd said while pouring tea. "You know that, right?" I already promised I'd help. Rachel sighed. "You always help." I smiled weakly. "Maybe this time will be different." She looked at me with an expression that made my stomach tighten. "No," she said gently, "you're hopping, it'll be different." There was a difference. I simply hadn't wanted to admit it. That morning, while we were setting up the venue, Natalie had pulled me aside. "One favor." "Sure." She pointed at the elegant gift box, sitting safely in my car. "Don't leave Grandma's gift on the present table." I frowned. "You don't want it with the others?" "No." She smiled. "I want you to hand it to me personally after dinner. It'll make better photos." I remembered thinking it was oddly specific. Still, I hadn't questioned her. After all, she'd been obsessed with every detail of the engagement party for weeks. I assumed it was just another one of those details. Now, sitting in my car, I realized something. If I'd obediently stayed in that kitchen chair, if I'd smiled through the humiliation, eventually she would have called me into the ballroom, accepted the gift in front of everyone, and posed for photographs exactly as she'd imagined. Everything had been planned, including where I belonged. Just not by me. The phone started vibrating again. This time it wasn't just family. My cousin Olivia. Then Uncle Mark. Then Aunt Denise. One after another. I picked up the phone and stared at the growing list of missed calls. Normally, I would have answered immediately. I would have apologized. I would have tried to smooth everything over. Instead, I pressed the power button and watched the screen go black. For the first time in my life, I chose not to come running simply because my family demanded it. And somehow, that frightened them far more than my leaving ever had. By the time I turned my phone back on 20 minutes later, I had 38 missed calls. Before I could even scroll through them, another call came in. It was my cousin Olivia. Unlike everyone else, she wasn't the type to exaggerate. I answered. "Emily, I'm here." There was a pause, followed by a long breath. "You have no idea what's happening." I glanced back toward the reception hall from the far end of the parking lot. I heard Natalie scream. Olivia let out a humorless laugh. "That's putting it mildly." Inside the banquet hall, what had been a celebration was quickly unraveling. The photographer had gathered everyone near the floral backdrop for the official engagement photos. Natalie had proudly announced she was about to reveal Grandma's heirloom ring. Only when she reached for the gift, it wasn't there. "The box Emily brought," she had shouted. "Where did she put it?" Someone quietly answered, "She took it when she left." According to Olivia, the color drained from Natalie's face. Then she spun toward my parents. "Go get her." Instead of asking why I had walked out, she immediately blamed me for ruining the evening. My mother grabbed her purse and hurried toward the exit. Dad followed close behind, dialing my number over and over. Guests exchanged confused glances. One whispered, "Why would Emily leave with the engagement gift?" Another replied more importantly, "Why was she eating in the kitchen?" The questions spread faster than the music. People who hadn't seen the seating arrangement began asking about it. Those who had witnessed it couldn't ignore it anymore. Then Aunt Denise stood up. She wasn't loud by nature, but when she spoke, the room quieted. "Can someone explain," she asked, looking directly at Natalie, "why Emily's place card was beside the cleaning supplies?" Natalie forced a laugh. "It was just a joke." "A joke," Aunt Denise repeated. "She spent weeks helping with this party." No one answered. Another guest spoke up. "I thought there'd been a mistake." "So did I," someone else admitted. "I almost offered her my seat." Then one of the bridesmaids, looking uncomfortable, quietly said, "There wasn't a mistake." Every head turned toward her. I watched Natalie approve every single seating assignment yesterday. A ripple of disbelief moved across the room. The kitchen seat had been intentional. Natalie's fiancé looked at her in stunned silence. "You actually planned that?" Natalie's smile disappeared. "It wasn't supposed to become a big deal." "But it did," he replied. Across the room, guests who had laughed awkwardly earlier now avoided eye contact. The atmosphere had completely changed. People were no longer discussing the missing ring. They were talking about the woman who had been publicly humiliated before she ever walked out. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I answered. "Emily, please," she said without even saying hello. "Just bring the gift back. We can fix everything." I looked at the unopened box resting on the passenger seat. Then I spoke as calmly as I had when I walked out. "The ring isn't yours." The line went completely silent. I didn't go back to the engagement party. Instead, I texted my father one sentence. "If you want to talk, meet me at Parker's Cafe, just you and Mom." 5 minutes later, he replied, "We'll be there." When they arrived, they looked nothing like the confident parents who had ignored me an hour earlier. Dad's tie was crooked. Mom's mascara had started to run. Neither of them ordered coffee. Mom spoke first. "Emily, just give Natalie the ring." I looked at her quietly. "You don't even know where the ring came from, do you?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" Without answering, I pulled the elegant gift box onto the table. For the first time that evening, I untied the ribbon. Dad leaned forward as I carefully lifted the lid. Inside, resting on dark blue velvet, was Grandma's diamond ring. Beside it sat a sealed envelope and a thick folder. I slid the folder across the table. Dad opened it. The first page was a notarized purchase agreement. The second contained signed transfers from every relative who had inherited a small percentage of Grandma's estate. Page after page carried signatures. Receipts. Legal acknowledgements. Dad kept turning pages until he finally looked up. "You've bought everyone's share." I nodded. "Months ago." Mom stared at me. "But why didn't you tell us?" "Because I wasn't buying a ring." I looked down at the velvet box. I was protecting Grandma's final wish. Neither of them spoke. So I continued. When Grandma's estate was divided, the ring technically belonged to several relatives together. Most of them didn't want to keep it. Dad slowly nodded. I contacted each of them privately. I paid every one of them fairly. No one was pressured. They signed everything willingly. I tapped the folder. "That's why these documents exist." Mom swallowed hard. "So, legally, the ring belongs to me." There wasn't anger in my voice. Only certainty. For the first time that evening, there was nothing anyone could argue. Then I picked up the sealed envelope. My hands hesitated for just a second before I opened it. Grandma's familiar handwriting covered both pages. I slid the letter across the table. Dad read aloud quietly. "If you're reading this, then Emily has honored the promise she made me." His voice faltered. Mom reached for his arm. He continued, The ring should belong to the granddaughter who gave me her time instead of her attention only when others were watching. Dad stopped reading. Neither parent looked at me. Neither could. I remembered every hospital visit, every grocery trip, every evening spent helping Grandma eat dinner after work. Not because I expected anything in return. Because she was my grandmother. The letter continued. Jewelry can be inherited, character cannot. Mom covered her mouth. Tears rolled silently down her face. Finally, Dad looked up. We never knew. I met his eyes. You never asked. The words landed harder than I intended. Because they were true. For years they had assumed. Natalie wanted something. Emily would handle it. Natalie celebrated. Emily worked behind the scenes. Natalie received praise. Emily received another reminder to be the bigger person. Now the pattern had finally reached its end. Mom reached carefully toward the ring. Emily, please. I gently closed the box before she could touch it. No. Dad sighed. The guests are waiting. They're expecting an explanation. They'll get one, I answered. But not the one Natalie wants. I stood, slipped the folder back into the gift box, and picked it up. I'm not giving away Grandma's ring. And I'm not pretending tonight didn't happen. Neither parent tried to stop me. For the first time in my life, they realized they no longer could. Just then the cafe door burst open. My cousin Olivia hurried inside, breathing hard. She looked straight at us. You need to know. She glanced at my parents before finishing. Everyone at the party knows the truth now. I arrived back at the reception hall, carrying the same gift box I had walked out with. The music had stopped. The photographer was packing away equipment. Clusters of guests stood whispering instead of celebrating. Every conversation ended the moment I stepped through the doors. Natalie was still standing near the floral backdrop, her makeup smudged from crying. My parents followed a few steps behind me but said nothing. I walked to the center of the room and placed the gift box on a nearby table. I didn't come back for the party, I said calmly. I came back to settle one question. No one interrupted. I opened the box and removed the folder. This ring was never promised to Natalie. I handed the notarized documents to my uncle, who happened to be an attorney. Please read the first page. The room remained silent as he reviewed the paperwork. Then he flipped through the signed transfers one by one. After several long moments, he looked up. These documents are valid. He held up the final page. Emily legally purchased every ownership interest in the ring months ago. It belongs to her. A wave of murmurs spread across the room. Natalie's face went completely pale. That's impossible, she whispered. No, my uncle replied evenly. It's simply legal. Then I handed him Grandma's letter. He read it aloud. The ring should belong to the granddaughter who chose kindness when no one was watching. Jewelry can be inherited, character cannot. By the time he finished, several relatives had tears in their eyes. My mother quietly lowered her head. Dad couldn't bring himself to look at anyone. For the first time, they weren't defending Natalie. They couldn't. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room before Aunt Denise finally spoke. So Emily spent years taking care of your mother. She looked directly at my parents. And this is how you thanked her. Neither of them answered. One by one, other relatives began speaking. I thought the kitchen seat was an accident. It wasn't. I watched Natalie approve it herself. I should have said something. So should I. The conversations became impossible for Natalie to control. Her fiancé stepped forward, his expression filled with disappointment rather than anger. Did you really humiliate your own sister, just to get a laugh? Natalie opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He looked around the room, then back at her. I don't know who I've been planning to marry. Without another word, he removed the engagement ring from his finger, set it gently on the gift table, and walked out of the reception hall. The doors closed behind him. Natalie collapsed into a chair, sobbing. No one followed him. No one blamed me. Instead, several guests quietly gathered their coats and left. Within minutes, the celebration was over. The florist began removing centerpieces that were never used. The caterers packed untouched meals into containers. The photographer cancelled the remaining portraits. Months of planning ended in silence. The following week, I contacted every vendor I had personally paid and withdrew the remaining payments I had agreed to cover. Natalie and my parents had to handle the wedding expenses themselves. For the first time, I stopped rescuing them from the consequences of their own decisions. My parents reached out often after that. Not with excuses, with apologies. I listened. But forgiveness didn't mean returning to the life I'd left behind. I told them I was willing to rebuild our relationship only if respect came first. For the first time, they accepted that my boundaries weren't negotiable. As for Grandma's ring, I never wore it to make a statement. I had it professionally cleaned and placed in a glass display case, beside a framed photograph of her smiling in her garden. Whenever I looked at it, I didn't think about the engagement party. I thought about the quiet afternoons we spent drinking tea, playing cards, and talking about life. Those memories were the real inheritance. Everything else was just gold and diamonds. Looking back now, I realize the most important thing I carried out of that kitchen wasn't the gift box. It was my self-respect. They thought they had found the perfect place for me that night, next to the cleaning supplies, hidden where no one important would notice. But the moment I stood up and walked away, the only mess left behind was the one they had created themselves.